In ninth grade, in biology class, we had the usual dissection of fetal pigs, and I took the remains of that home and kept the skeleton of it, and I just started branching out. Dogs, cats. I suppose it could have turned into a normal hobby like taxidermy. And all I know is that I wanted to see what the insides of these animals looked like. There may have been some violence involved, some underlying subconscious feelings of violence. It was a compulsion. Became a compulsion.
What would you do with the dead animals, Jeff?
Take them back in the woods, skin them sometimes, slit them all the way open, look at the organs, feel them.
Can you describe what you were thinking?
It was just mystifying to me how the insides of the animal looked. There was a sort of general excitement for me. I don't know why. It was exciting to see. I was drinking a lot during that time, and just I don't know, looking for something some way to find some fulfillment, some pleasure. And I acted on my fantasies, and that's where everything went wrong.
Did you ever tell yourself, I have to stop this? I must stop doing this?
Yes.
When it was going on?
After the second time, it seemed like the compulsion to do it was too strong, and I didn't even try to stop it after that.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about Jeffrey Dahmer, as we know him as an infamous serial killer. He killed 17 men over 13 years. And I see him a little bit differently than maybe what's been depicted in media about how he's connected with people. And even though he killed people for his notoriety, he may have had an interesting way of a need to attach to his victims. And so let me give you a little bit of background about Jeffrey Dahmer that you may know about, you may not know about. So again, he has killed 17 men, or he's been convicted of killing 17 men over 13 years. He is the oldest child. He has one younger brother, which at the age of 6, I believe he was, when the brother was born, he had the liberty of being able to name this younger brother. Since his conviction and sentencing and ultimately his death, his brother has went about changing his name and his entire identity to push away from the Dahmer family. The relationship between his parents was always described as hostile, and they ultimately divorced when Dahmer was 18 years old. However, in his interviews, he often describes his parents as very loving, and that he didn't have the quote-unquote horrific childhood that you would suspect a serial killer to have. He did, though, describe, or in the media it's been described as his father being very distant and absent, because most of his childhood, his father was away pursuing his education. So oftentimes the father was away working or in school and was not there for a lot of Jeffrey's childhood experiences. That left him home alone with his mother, who often withheld attention from him, not because she really wanted to, but she was struggling with her own mental health concerns. She may have had some addiction issues, and it's been said that she's attempted suicide or has had some issues at home that held her from being that nurturing mother that a child really needs during their early formative years. Well, this will come as in a little bit later and not part of his attachment, But as a way to cope, Jeffrey started drinking very heavily in high school, and it does become a very integral part of his killing. So, if we want to talk about attachments and how that worked with Jeffrey Dahmer, his parents were seen as either distant, cold, or hostile and agitated. So, they either were not there, not very affectionate, or when he did see them interacting and engaging with each other, they were often fighting or at each other in some way where he didn't really see a lot of affection and love in his household. That's to be said to have created an insecure avoidant attachment in him. What that really means in attachment styles is that you have a caregiver that typically is unavailable or maybe consumed by their own needs. They're disconnected from emotions and they don't really show the child how to have appropriate emotions, either positive or negative. And so the kid is just kind of aloof when it comes to knowing how to connect to another person. Again, as Jeffrey describes his childhood, he claims it to be very normal and that his parents were loving, but they also ignored him, and there was a lot of chaos in the house, which isolated him away from human experience and human contact. Because he didn't really know how to attach effectively to other people, he learned to focus in on his own needs because that's the only way that he could get his needs met. That led him then to objectify his victims and not really see them as a human being. So my question to you is, was he a shy person or was he just a kid who didn't know how to get his needs met? And when he started to learn to get his needs met, it was often by control, overbearing, and then when he would see his victims, that control ultimately led him to killing because his biggest fear was being abandoned. So I know this isn't really discussed a lot in the media when we talk about Jeffrey Dahmer because we want to look at only his crimes and take it from a victim perspective. But if we look at it through the psychology lens, there is so much more to this case than what we really have talked about, especially when we speak of attachment. So Jeffrey Dahmer really wanted to connect with people, but the way he learned to connect with people was not socially acceptable. He only knew how to overpower his victims and take control of them. But what he really said is he wanted to create living zombies. And these living zombies, if we look about it psychologically, he wanted the connectedness of a warm body. And typically when he killed his victims and then had sex with them and did all the things he did with his corpses, he then got used to having the closeness of a person there and they were cold. So he learned to adapt his need for attachment to people in the only way that he knew to get it, and that was through means of killing, because he does say in all of his interviews killing was not his motive. He really wanted closeness, but most of all he feared abandonment. So let's talk about how that abandonment fear and his attachment style really led him to kill based upon his claimed diagnosis. So, of course, going through his trial and his convictions, he was observed and evaluated by many mental health professionals. And what was come about his evaluations is that he had 3 diagnoses. He had borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic disorder. And I'll talk about how, in particular, these diagnoses worked for Jeffrey. So the BPD, he had this intense feeling of actual or perceived abandonment. And with a person who has BPD, they will often use extreme lengths to not be abandoned or even feel abandoned. So at the same time, he desired closeness, but he often could not tolerate other people's emotions because he objectified them. So there's this like push pull in his entire personality and persona that really complicated his story. And the last part of the BPD that was really significant with Jeffrey is that he was unable to incorporate the needs of other people. He only knew how to get his needs met, and he never really saw a way to do it effectively that was also socially acceptable, because by the time he began having these fantasies, and he felt he had no one to talk to, he just introverted and allowed these thoughts to just continue to compound and become stranger until he couldn't resist the impulses any longer. That also plays into the schizotypal personality disorder, because he developed like this suspiciousness and paranoid thoughts when it came to like the loyalty of others. He often felt that if people knew him or got to see much of him, that when they were not intoxicated or he wasn't intoxicated, that they would leave. And again, that goes back to his ultimate fear was this abandonment, and he used lethal means to avoid that. Also, a schizotypal personality disorder describes a person who is often a loner. They don't show much emotions. You never really know if that person is coming or going. They just kind of seem off in their head and aloof to a lot of social context and social awareness, or eye contact with people, or mirroring other people's emotions. And he also had this like special belief that he had special powers. Like he believed that if he drilled into people's heads with certain chemicals and if he kept experimenting, he would eventually create this living zombie. So for him, that schizotypal personality disorder started really getting in there and creating these paranoid thoughts and this superpower that he could be this being of power that could ultimately not kill people and also get him the closeness. So I think that when he wanted these living zombies, his ultimate goal was to create this closeness without killing. But he never found a way to do that. And so he just continued, like we all do. You continue to do the things that you know when you can't figure out something different. And then lastly, his psychotic disorder. He often had to detach from reality, and he would use alcohol as a way to help him with this as well. And again, he thought that he could create the living zombies. That plays a little bit into the psychotic disorder as well. He saw killing as a way to keep people with him. If you've ever listened to any of his interviews, he always talks about if he consumed a body part, or if he kept a skull, or if he kept the person in his freezer or in his basement, it was a way to have that person eternally be with him. And so that tells me that was his way of attaching to people. But it again goes back to the fact that it's not socially acceptable, it's not legal, and it was truly frowned upon. And so this man was really lost in the way to get human connection and human love, since he didn't really see it as a child. Although he saw his parents as loving, he didn't have anything else to compare it to, because at the age of 18 is when he started his killing spree. And so he really never got to make that human to human connection with another person. And the schizotypal personality disorder really affected him to get in there and actually be close to another person, because that is really scary for a person with that diagnosis. So Jeffrey really wanted this control, but he wanted to connect with people. And so this imbalance, or the ends of the spectrum that he really came from, made it difficult for him to make any human connection. And that is the reason why he often picked up his victims in a bar where he was intoxicated. He could get them intoxicated, and then he can carry out the killings, because he just really did not know how to communicate to people on an emotional level. He did describe, though, when he was caught, that he was actually happy and he did help the police uncover all of the details about his victims, and he didn't seem to do it in a way that was boastful or that he was bragging about the killings that he committed. It was more or less a relief from him because he knew he couldn't stop and that the impulses would continue. And oftentimes, when someone has a disorder that is related to psychosis or schizotypal, they really have a difficulty of being able to negotiate reality and understand the basis of reality, even though he was found to be sane during his trial. And that's a difficult kind of finding someone sane or insane is really challenging in a court case because the insanity plea is saying that they don't understand the difference between right and wrong in the concert of their crime they committed. And Jeffrey knew that what he was doing was wrong, but he also described that he could not refrain from the impulses that he experienced. So coupling all these things together, his fear of abandonment, but he wanted to connect to people. He couldn't connect because he worried that they would leave, and he couldn't connect to them emotionally. And so he wanted to drill holes in their head to zombie them out like himself so that he would be able to relate to another person like him, because he probably felt like he was an emotional zombie. And that was maybe, I don't know, I've never talked to him, but maybe that's why he really felt he needed to bring his victims to the place he was at in order to relate to them. So he wasn't able to pull back or hush down the sexual desires that he was experiencing. I don't think he ever felt like he could talk to another person about his sexual desires, and so it just left his mind to be an open playground to breed all of these thoughts that just became stranger and stranger, and he did not know himself how to pull that back. And really, I don't think he really understood the depth of his illness, which most people don't. But I think that if we kind of retracted back to the attachment style of Jeffrey Dahmer, he was a very complicated person, and most people who have insecure avoidant attachment don't necessarily go down the serial killer route. They don't go as far as what he did. But because he also had these other mental health disorders and these challenges that were going on that developed through life, and the personality disorders, specifically borderline personality disorder and the schizotypal personality disorders, are often developed through experiences. And that's why we call them personality disorders, is because it is a result of something that did not work well in the person's psyche or abuse. And because he doesn't claim to have experienced abuse, we're not sure where exactly this emerged from, other than being neglected. And, you know, neglect is still abuse, but a lot of times people don't see a mentally ill mother or an absent father as being abusive. But oftentimes that is developed in the psyche. So with his attachment style, his personality disorders, and psychosis, all coupled together, I believe, created the perfect storm for him to be one of the most infamous serial killers. But that's just a different look at Jeffrey Dahmer, one that you may not have taken before, and one that you can consider to see the man behind the crimes. I hope this was a really good episode for you. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to bringing you more episodes like this where we discuss when psychology doesn't turn out so well. Take care.